Welcome to Massive Passive Cash Flow, the podcast that guides professionals to financial prosperity. Join our community and let's start building your wealth. Here's your host, Gary Wilson.
Hello, and welcome back to the Massive Passive Cash Flow podcast. This is Gary Wilson, your host. We're glad to have you back. Hey, if you haven't done so, please feel free to subscribe to the podcast. It's on 30 different channels, including your favorites, Stitcher, iTunes, iHeartRadio. And a quick announcement, we have rolled out the new website, which is globalinvestoragent.com. And you can now locate an investor agent in your city, state, province, country. You can locate them by name. And remember, these are real estate agents, but they're not your average agent. They are trained to work with us investors. They know how to identify, analyze, and negotiate on and off market deals. Okay. So go grab yourself one of those guys and check it out. And by the way, while you're doing that, we've got a great guest today, Casey Gray, all the way from beautiful Ottawa, Canada. Been there many times. Love the hospitality and the food and the culture. If you've never been to Ottawa, you owe it to yourself to go. Obviously, it's the capital of Canada. A lot of people see it now on the news because of the trucking demonstration that's going on. But you know what? Don't let it deter you. They're being peaceful about it, and they're making a statement. And let's have a cheer for the amendment that both countries have for free speech. That's all they're doing. But in the meantime, go out there and have fun because it's a great place to be. So Casey, first off, thank you very much for being on here. I know you're a busy guy, and we really appreciate you taking your time to do this.
I appreciate you having me, Gary. Thank you so much.
Excellent. Hey, if you wouldn't mind, give us a little bit of background. I mean, maybe you're born and raised in Ottawa or the surrounding province around there, or you've come from somewhere else, whatever it is, and kind of lead us into what led you to where you are today. Maybe an example of a property or two you've done yourself, if you don't mind, and give us a little bit of detail. People like detail,
Sure, I'll walk you through in a couple mistakes too. I was born and raised in Ottawa, like suburbia outside. It's called Orleans, but part of Ottawa, and there in Orleans actually probably until I bought my first house there. So went through high school, ended up buying my mom's house from her, and I turned that into a duplex. So that was my first purchase. I think I was 19, might've been 20. So I was already in construction. I started my construction career right out of high school at 17. My mom helped me buy the house. I did the duplex. And then I ended up buying another house with my girlfriend. It was in my name, but moved with my girlfriend at the time and moved to the west end of the city, and then went back to the east end. Too much traffic in the east end of the city. And then from there it grew. I bought a couple other houses. And what ended up happening, I went through my career, got my carpentry license and so forth, ended up going out on my own. My wife, who's now my wife, we've been together since, however many years, 16, 17 years now. Okay. So she ended up going to California for school. I had a couple of houses at the time, and actually 3, but I was living in a basement apartment of my boss at the time because it was cheaper with my younger brother, because it was cheaper for me to rent than what I was getting for rent at my places originally. And I didn't need much. I had my truck, I had my motorcycle, I had tools in my truck, and a bedroom and a kitchen. Sort of, that's all I needed. Right. So, and I'd travel, and I'd go see my wife in California every few months. Mm-hmm. And we did that for a couple of years. And eventually she came back and things started to expand. Tried to do a flip. It didn't really go that well. So I ended up having to move into it, and I sold another house. This was kind of the beginning of my mistakes that I mentioned at the beginning. And in the sense that I shouldn't have bought that one house to flip it. Flipping in Ottawa doesn't really work that well unless you're going into a higher end flip, I found. And from there, we kind of started to expand our consciousness. And in the sense of, we ended up going to this Tony Robbins event. And by this time I had been in business about 2 years. So like 9 years in construction at the time, and that event changed our lives. We came out of that event and we started asking a lot of questions. And one of them was, why do I do what I do? And that question was in the head, kept rolling it around. And it wasn't until another Tony Robbins event called Date Was Destiny. The first one was Unleash the Power Within. But at that second Tony Robbins event, we found out we were having our first child.
Oh,
And
wow.
then it started to click. Then I was like, okay, if I'm going to tell this little person that he or she can be or do anything that they want, I have to lead by example. So what do I want to do? What kind of legacy do I want to leave behind?
Right.
And that's when the conscious builder started to come into focus. The word conscious really stuck with us, really resonated with us. We actually, my wife and I did a podcast called the Conscious Living Podcast. You can still get it. All the episodes are out there. We don't do it anymore. But that led to the Conscious Builder, which is my construction company now. We rebranded and we started going into more of the high performance building and custom homes. And we kicked that off with a certified passive house. So I don't know if you're familiar with passive house certification. Essentially, it's the world's most rigorous building standards. So It's extreme air tightness, high insulation values, proper orientation, take advantage of the sun. It's different than a passive solar house. It's actually a certification. So we don't need to get into, unless you really want to dig into those details, but that's what we kicked it off with. But in order to do that, I sold the rental properties. So, and then we ran into cost overruns. And so I was kind of living beyond my means for a little bit, which was kind of the end of the mistakes. I say that house was like the best thing I did and the worst thing at the same time, because it hurt us financially, but it created the foundation for the Conscious Builder and what we stood for as a company. And we never returned back. Right. And we're doing some amazing projects. But it was rough for a little bit. I was actually going through a lawsuit when we were building that house. We were about to have our son and dealing with that house all at the same time. So I look back on that. I'm like, I don't know what I was doing, but it's good to be naive sometimes. Right. So, but made it through it, made me stronger, made us better, made me a better business person. And now back into like business is doing better than ever. We have more work locked in than we've ever had locked in. Our team's doing amazing. My partner, I have a brother who came on as a partner. Just everything's going great on the construction side. And then I ended up getting back into real estate. But then instead of just going back into single, I got into I bought an 8-unit building in Brockville. So about 2 hours, or actually, it's an hour and a half from Ottawa, an hour from where I live. And now I'm partnering with a couple people doing like a higher end flip with somebody and doing some other projects with some partners as well on the real estate world. And I've gotten into other investments as well, cryptocurrency actually, which is funding some of the real estate stuff that I'm doing. So all of those big mistakes have led me to where I am today. And I wouldn't change anything for the world.
Yeah. Well, it sounds like you really did release the power within.
Yes.
It's funny. I read my first book in personal development was Tony Robbins' Awaken the Giant Within. And that was, when was that? That had to be late 90s, maybe early 2000s. And that was the beginning of my journey also. And throughout the years, in fact, his son, Andrew, and I had the same coach for a while, Tony Robbins. Wow. And then Chet Holmes, I never met him. He's passed away, but his daughter and I, Amanda, were in the same mastermind group together for a while. And then I was also partners with the guy who took Chet Holmes' place. Tommy Schaff and I were partners in a couple things. So it's a really small world. And I tell you what, everybody listening, always say yes to opportunity. Don't ever say no. I don't care if it seems like it's way beyond anything you think you're capable of. Because the reality is you will figure out how. Nobody built a 100-story building right out of the gate. They built up, they said yes to the opportunity because they built a 50-story building before that. They say yes to that one. You just say yes to opportunity, and I promise you'll figure it out. So, if we could, Casey, by the way, that's my preaching moment for today. If you could, I want to. I'm really interested in the investing you've done, like the 8-unit, for example. I know a lot of investors start off doing, single families, duplexes, and maybe a couple flips. And sounds like you did sort of the same thing, and I did too. I only know one person who started off with a 94-unit building right out of the gate. He was an engineer. Yeah, pretty neat guy. But what I want to do is kind of start off with the 8-unit building, and let's talk about some of the logistics. Like, what did you do to identify it? Did you do research? Did it just simply somebody referred it to you? What kind of analysis did you do? Physical analysis and financial analysis too, because there's two different things. And then take us through the actual the purchasing process. How did you structure the deal? Was it private money? Was it institutional money? If you don't mind, as much as you can share, and obviously protect privacy. If anybody else is involved there, you want to protect their, keep their name, change their name.
Yeah.
But if you don't mind sharing that, and then I want to jump into some other subjects if you don't mind.
Yeah. So that one is fairly recent. It was last year when I got back into that. So that one is bought in a corporation. So I have a numbered corporation. I actually, one thing I left out is I started doing some Airbnb stuff too. So to raise some funds. So I was doing Airbnb before COVID, but I was renting units and then subletting them. Right. So I didn't have to purchase the house or anything. But I had this corporation doing that. And then when COVID hit, that obviously went to zero. So I stopped doing that and didn't want to deal with it anymore anyways. And then I was just starting to look, right. I got, when COVID hit, I started to look more into cryptocurrency. Made a lot of sense. And every day I'm researching more on that. So I can talk a little bit more on that later. But this factored into that 8-unit building, because what I ended up doing is borrowing against my cryptocurrency investments in order to get the down payment for this 8-unit building, which is in the numbered company. So, because I didn't want to sell like the asset, right? And especially when I ended up the way it closed, crypto had taken a little bit of a dump, and I knew, like anything, it's going to go up eventually, right? And I was in it for the long term, so I didn't want to get rid of it at that point. So I just ended up borrowing against it. And I currently, because it was within the last year, I did do private, because my goal when I ran the numbers is to get the rent up, get some of the tenants out if I can, or negotiate something with them, an upgrade, and get the rents up, and then refinance it. In order to, going back a little bit to identifying the building, I was looking a little bit. This one kind of just popped out to me because it kind of showed bad in the pictures, but to me, with my experience in construction, it looked like a solid building to me. And the price was right. It was fairly close to home, so I could get there and, deal with managing this type of building, because it's my first 8-unit building. I want to see what it takes to manage before I give it to somebody else. I just want to understand that. That's just the way I like to do it. And went and saw it. Obviously, like I said, it was a solid building. There ended up being 11 offers on it. So I think they had listed it for $790, 8 units. So that's a good price, right? Less than $100,000 per door. Yep. And I said, I can't remember what we were going to go in with, but my agent, my friend called me back and he's like, all right, there's 11 offers on this. What do you want to do? I said, well, I ran the numbers and I can do 850. It makes sense at 850. I'm not going to go more than there. It doesn't, I'm not emotionally attached to it in any way. Right. That's just what makes sense to me. And he said, all right, well, what's your favorite number? I said 11. He goes, well, we'll do 850, 110. And I'll give you the extra $110 back, which he never did, by the way. I should probably reach out to him. So he calls me back. So I was on a site that day. I went back home and saw my wife, and my mother-in-law was there actually. And I was like, probably not going to get it. No big deal. He called me 2 minutes after I said that. He goes, so I'm talking to the agents and on a call with the owners, and you're still in the running. I did not expect to be able to get it with that many offers. And turns out they just liked our story. Apparently, who knows? We might have had the best offer. We'll never actually know. Right. But we ended up getting the building, and that was about 8 months ago now. So we're in the process of refinancing. We couldn't get the tenant, so I didn't get the numbers up to what I wanted. So I did get the value up, and I'll find out exactly to what this month. But based on my calculation, I got it at 850. It should be worth over $1 million based on the math and what I increased the rents to based on the initial evaluation that was done on the property, and I confirmed this. And so we'll see what actually comes of that. So what I learned from that, though, is Ontario is notoriously difficult to get tenants out, right? We can't kick tenants. The law is in the tenant's favor, and a lot of people are aware of that. That's why a lot of people actually don't invest in Ontario. But Ontario is home to me, and I'll navigate it. And even though people, the one reason why I couldn't get people to go is that there was no other places to go for them. There's literally hardly anything on the market to rent. So even if they wanted to move, they couldn't move anywhere. Right. So that was just reality of where we are right now in the state, especially in and around the Ottawa area.
Yeah.
And why the market's taking off so much is we have a shortage. So why would somebody move out, even if you're going to work a deal with them, if they have nowhere else to go, sort of thing. But luckily the tenants are all great. And one of them did want two of them wanted renovations, and so far so good. It's been going really, really great on that front. And cryptocurrency is going back up. So I made a good decision on that front to keep that.
Yeah.
So, and we're at this point, I'm working with some partners to do some other larger deals, and my brother as well. So we'll be, we just backed out of a deal because of environmental assessment, but
yeah. Well, you brought up a couple of key points there. One of them was the offer. Whenever you're in a multiple offer scenario, guys, especially in a hot market like now where you're getting, 10 offers. We had one property in what's called the Panhandle of Florida, Pensacola, Florida, that we were bidding on, and the agent called back, and we knew him. And he said, "Guys, I'm sorry, I can't take your offer. We've already received 122 offers, and we just have to stop. We can't even look at them all." So, but one of the tricks is, let's say again, it's 800,000, and you do your numbers, you can go to 850. Well, other people are probably thinking the same thing or something close to it, and some people have been thinking, what, I'm going to add an extra $100 just for good measure. What we learned to do was add some really oddball figure, like $135.79. And you'd be amazed at how many calls we get calls back saying, you're in the running, but there's still people that have a higher bid. We're just curious, why did you put in such a strange offer number like that? And we would say, well, because our client is really good at what they do. They know the building, they know the area, they know precisely what this thing should sell for, down to the penny. Or down to the toonie if we're up in Canada, and you'd be amazed at how many times that little extra bit will get us to deal. And we did find out sometimes what other offers were, because people would come by and say, "You're the guy that bought that house," and I'd say, "Yeah, sure am." And so y'all bid me by $113.57, and I'm like, "Really?" And I just smile and say, "How about that?" And I didn't tell them that was my favorite trick, but really interesting strategy. It works quite a bit. And then the other thing about the landlord-tenant law, so for everyone listening, whether you're in Quebec, Ontario, or any of the 50 states, really learn the law, because there's some strange customs you'll find. Like within Ontario, Toronto even has its own subset of laws inside the provincial laws that make it even tougher. For example, in the wintertime, if you try to evict someone, they'll give you the judgment, but you can't execute on it till springtime. You can't kick somebody out in the wintertime. And by the way, if they can't pay their heating bill, guess who gets stuck with it? The judge could say, and by the way, you've got to keep the place heated. Like a double whammy. But and in Montreal, I don't know if they still do this, you actually could not collect the security deposit. And I thought, well, that's mind-boggling. I mean, my gosh, what's your security? But it's a different custom. And they have different types of, different headaches in different areas. But at the end of the day, if it makes money, you've got to deal with the yin and the yang. You just have to study what both are and then make your decisions based on that. So thanks for sharing that, by the way. A lot of people don't share those things, and it's pretty important,
Yeah. And I'm still excited. We didn't get to what we wanted to do, but I know that we will, because tenants will move out. Like I have a couple students in there, and I know that the rents are so low right now that the only way to go is up at this point. Right. So, and the other thing actually I want to point out is I put it in my numbered company, and this, I'm sure this has come up on your show, but just in case there's some newbies, I put it in my numbered company because down the road, if I want to give this to my son, for example, I just have to give him the company.
Right.
And there's no land transfer taxes. Yep. So by putting it in a corporation, it keeps it obviously out of my personal. You have to jump through some hoops sometimes on the commercial side of things for that. But in the long-term game, this is going to make the most sense, because I can just say, here you go, Sullivan, give him the business, no land transfer taxes, no nothing, and whatever properties that building owns goes to him, if I choose to do that.
Yeah.
We'll see how it goes in the future. But
yeah, we do the same thing too. We actually started using trust recently, and trust it's a stronger body of law than even corporate law. But setting up a corporation is a great idea, especially if you're starting out. It's a lot less expensive, and like you said, you don't if you sell the shares of stock in the company, or just basically transfer the ownership of the company, you're right. The property didn't change hands, only the company did. So technically, it doesn't kick off a transfer tax. So, in any case, great strategies. If you wouldn't mind, I want to kind of shift gears and talk about some of the new things you're working on, like the term conscious builder. I want to touch on you mentioned a few things earlier about the being it's a designation, and the properties are not just like they're solar properties, but they're extremely efficient and tight. Can we talk about that for a bit? Because I think it is a growing trend. I know that for a fact, but I do believe that there are a lot of investors that'd be interested in that, because it does add value. And if it keeps costs down the road, I mean, I know for me as an investor, I started off looking for cash flow. And as time went on, I started looking more and more for capital appreciation. Cash flow is still important, but I was looking more for the appreciation part of it. And that type of construction, I think, would lead towards a lot more appreciation. But if you wouldn't mind, let's just talk about some of the few basic components of it. What does it really mean? And what are insulation, instead of 2x4s, timber, maybe you're using, steel stuff, things like that, whatever that entails. I want to give people some real information that they can take away and possibly look for more information as a result.
Yeah. So I guess the way it's built in terms of like the structure isn't as important as how you put it all together, whatever the components. So the biggest thing is we need to understand the building science, understand that the building, no matter what the building is, works as a system. It's not each component separately. You have to look at how each thing affects the other. Mm-hmm. So, excuse me. So if you look at I focus on comfort, right? So if you have a comfortable and a healthy building, by default, you will have an efficient building. Mm-hmm. So if we think about a uncomfortable home, what makes a home uncomfortable? I'll ask you, Garrett, like what makes a home uncomfortable to you?
Yeah, drafty windows and doors and creaky floors.
Yeah. So drafts, windows, or it could be coming through anywhere. Sometimes drafts at windows, though, aren't necessarily drafts. It's convection, right? It's a convection current because the window doesn't actually perform well. So if it's really cold outside and it's warm inside and the glass gets cold, it creates that convection current and it feels like it's windy. I don't have any hair. I'm wearing a hat. You can't see, but I had this example, like we had a window in one of our houses, and when I'd sit in front of it in the winter, I could feel it. As soon as we changed that window to a better window, way more comfortable to sit in front of it. You didn't need the fireplace on anymore, sort of thing, right? So, so a few things that make a building really comfortable. So if we focus, first we got to focus on the envelope, and the envelope consists of your wall assembly, your windows, your doors, your roof, and there's a bunch of components within that. So what's most important, though, in that wall assembly, I would say, is the air tightness. And people don't understand this portion. There's actually 3 barriers to a home. There's a weather barrier, there's an air barrier, and there's a vapor barrier. And most people consider the vapor barrier and the air barrier the same thing, but they are not the same at all. And technically, if you think about it, obviously the weather barrier needs to go on the outside. Where we are, because it's cold in the winter, the vapor barrier is supposed to go on the inside, but the vapor barrier should really go on the warm side. So in Florida, it should technically go on the outside of the building. Okay. And then the air barrier can go anywhere. It could be the same as a vapor barrier, or it could be the same as the weather barrier, but it doesn't have to be. It could go in the middle of the wall.
Okay.
And so the first thing is air barrier. If you want a comfortable home, you need to make sure that your house is airtight. And the example of that is, think of a jacket, right? If it's, you're in Ottawa, today's actually pretty warm, but the last week it was like minus 25 degrees Celsius or something. Okay. You put on a big jacket, a big down jacket. If you go outside and you leave the zipper open, it doesn't matter how warm how much insulation the jacket has. It's useless if you're facing the wind and all the wind's blowing through it. Right. Think of that as your jacket. You need the windbreaker and the insulation. The insulation alone doesn't really do much. You need to first stop that wind, and then you need to also have that insulation. And then I get the question, well, don't you need your walls to breathe? And I say, yes, you need your home to breathe, but you don't want your walls to breathe. So think of your walls as your skin, right? Your skin of your body. You can perspire, you can sweat, so vapor can come through it, but you breathe through your lungs. That's what we want a house to do. So you want to make your skin, your envelope, as airtight as possible, insulate it well, and actually get rid of thermal bridges. I didn't get into that. I'll touch a little bit on that. And when you take care of that, then you mechanically ventilate your home. So you put in either an HRV or an ERV, depending on where you live. And what those systems are, it's essentially a fresh air system. That's what the EPA actually calls them. Okay. I think when they go through some of their documents. Anyways, the way that works is that as fresh air is coming into the building, there is stale air leaving the building at the same rate if it's balanced properly. But before the air comes in and before the air leaves, it goes through a core. And in that core, the air doesn't mix, but it transfers the heat or the cold or whatever, however you want to look at it, but it transfers it from one side to the other. So if it's minus 10 degrees outside and you have it at, I'm talking Celsius. I know there's going to be Americans listening to this, but say it's minus 10 degrees Celsius and plus 20 inside. As that air comes in, you don't want minus 10 degree air coming into your house. Well, that 20 degree air is going to precondition it without mixing, without using any electricity or gas or anything, and then blow warmer air into the home. So that's a heat exchanger. And that's how that system works. And that's better than your walls breathing, so to speak, or air leaking, because if you're just relying on leaky walls, that just means that you have minus 10, minus 20, whatever temperature, even if it's plus. Florida's terrible. Florida's homes are terrible, right? I've been into so many mildew. You can smell it as soon as you walk in there. Like air tightness and proper insulation would go so far in Florida, right? So it's the same concept. Keep the air conditioned, keep the air outside out, and the conditioned air in, and only exchange it through the actual system, like the lungs of a home, which is an HRV or an ERV.
Yeah, I like it. By the way,
windows are a big thing. I could talk about this for a long time.
I've got a kind of a off the subject factoid for everybody. Some folks know I lived in Ontario for 5 years and still up there quite a bit. And I wanted to figure out, between metrics and the imperial numbering system, there's relationships you can draw. Like in other words, up in Canada, the highest speed limit is generally 100 kilometers an hour, and that's just about 63 miles an hour. So I always tell my American friends, when you're up there, just remember 163, and just use that ratio wherever you are. If you're driving in town and it says 50 kilometers per hour in a city street, then that's about 2/3 of that is what you should go. Now, my cars all have both metric and empirical numbers on there, but when it came to the temperature, you couldn't do that. There was no ratio, but it turns out there's one number where both Celsius and Fahrenheit are exactly the same, and it's minus 40. And a lot of people don't realize that. I just did the math on it, kept looking at it, thinking, well, isn't that interesting, So in any case, everybody's thinking, okay, good enough here. Let's get back to real estate. If you could, I want to really, we always like to wrap up with a golden nugget. And being that you have such a solid construction background, would you mind, and we got a few minutes left, kind of give people something that like the novice can look at and determine, hey, this is something I need to get an expert to see, or I really think this is a problem. When you're looking at a property doing physical analysis, something like a foundation, we have what we call, step cracks, and then you have real genuine foundation problems. But how do people know? Is there something you can tell people to look for that's like a big ticket item that anybody can say, that's an indication of a serious problem? Because I've seen people buy properties because it looks really good. They think this house doesn't need anything. They buy it, only realize that crooked floor was a result of a bad foundation. So anything along those lines you can think of that we could safely convey to investors to say, this is something really everybody should look at, and here's how you determine if it's really a problem or could be a problem.
Yeah, it's a tough one. I don't know, because every building, especially if there's been work done to it, it's hard to say. Like the building we were about to purchase, I could tell that the renovations, some of them were done on the cheap, because floors, they kind of like redid a bathroom, but they raised, because they had the ceiling room, you stepped up into the bathroom. So I know that they did it for plumbing, but that doesn't mean that there's anything wrong with it. I'm almost probably better that they did that instead of cutting floor joists apart. Who knows? Yeah. But this was an old hotel from like the 1800s too. So a sagging floor, could be a foundation issue. I guess my gold nugget, I would say be careful with building inspectors.
Okay.
Just because they did a course doesn't mean they understand construction.
Oh, yeah.
I'm much more of, find somebody who's done it, find a contractor, instead of getting a fancy report with pictures telling you that stuff that you probably already know. Maybe get, and not to say that all building inspectors are bad. Like there is some that maybe were a contractor, now they're inspectors.
Yeah.
If you can find somebody like that, then great. But find somebody who understands buildings and has ripped them apart and put them back together. Maybe pay them to do a visit. Don't pay if you don't need the report. Have them come take a look at it and be like, what do you think about this? Find a contractor that you trust that actually understands how a building is done. Like I had a call with somebody yesterday just over the phone and they showed me pictures of something. I'm like, that addition, and I knew just because of my experience that, to toot my own horn a little bit, I'm like, that side is where your garage is, right? And they're like, yeah. I'm like, your garage is likely an addition, correct? And they're like, yeah. I'm like, all right, there's a good chance your garage doesn't have a proper foundation and it's pulling, as you go through the seasons, it's pulling away from the house and it's causing that wall to crack inside. Yeah. So it's forcing it to move. Like it's not a huge issue, but that's what's happening. You're never going to fix that crack unless you fix your garage, right? Yeah. Things like that.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting. You mentioned at the very beginning of the podcast, you mentioned the fact that it's really systems, and the house really is a system of systems. You've got your HVAC, you've got the footing, the foundation, the framing, the skin, which is your siding outside and the drywall inside, windows, plumbing, electrical. I mean, they're all systems, and nobody can really claim to be an expert at all systems, but generally somebody who's done construction and build houses, done remodeling is probably going to have a real good hands-on, be able to give you a good hands-on view of things and give you an accurate assessment, right? I've seen a lot of inspection reports that they're not really worth the paper they're printed on, just so they're so vague. It's like they're trying to protect themselves. And so I'm not trying to tell everybody don't use an inspector, but I did get away from using inspectors myself and started bringing in some of the guys that were doing my remodeling and because they wouldn't just say, hey, this is an issue. They also say, and here's how you correct it,
right?
Which is really what you need to know. So,
it doesn't matter if it's an issue. You need to know how much it's going to cost to fix it.
Yeah.
But I bet you whatever you pay for that, that piece of paper, you could spread that over a few subcontractors and get all the answers that you need and actually get more value from it.
That's exactly right. Yeah. A lot of guys that do plumbing also do HVAC, for example. And so you get an HVAC guy in there, the carpenter and an electrician. Chances are you got the basic systems covered, and give them each $100 instead of an inspector, $350 or something. But hey, Casey, looks like we're right at time. I want to just thank you again for doing this. I know you're really busy and you're really successful, and we're always grateful to have someone like you on the show. So thanks for doing this, and for everybody listening, thank you for listening. And again, if you could do this, reviews are what makes the podcast business go around. If you could go ahead and give Casey a good review, whether you're on Stitcher, iTunes, iHeartRadio, just takes a minute to do it. We certainly appreciate it. And in the world of podcasting, that's like our currency. It's free, but it allows other people to find us more easily, especially with a subject like this. So thanks for doing that. And by the way, definitely check out globalinvestoragent.com. Grab yourself an investor agent. If you're an agent yourself, you should definitely check it out, because we don't teach the typical real estate stuff. We really teach you how to invest, about investing, so you know how to work with the right kind of investors, and you get to invest yourself. Great combination. Hey, Casey, how can people get a hold of you? Anybody that wants to find out what you're doing, especially with the building that you're doing, conscious building and things like that's going to pique a lot of interest, I think. So any websites, emails, things like that?
Yeah, we have a podcast. You can find us at the Conscious Builder Show. We have a YouTube channel too. We put most of our, we share a lot of our projects that we're doing there. So just go to YouTube, search the Conscious Builder, will pop up. And if there are any contractors listening, I definitely recommend you check out consciousbuilderacademy.com. We're doing some online courses there. And we're also going to be starting a Discord group in the coming weeks, where we're going to be building a community where we can actually, you'll have more interaction with myself and my team. And then we'll want to build a community where we're helping other contractors and homeowners too. They want to come up there, because we work with a lot of homeowners who are just interested in working on their own homes as well. So there's a lot of really exciting things happening there. If you're interested in building science and ultimately building better homes and high performance homes.
That sounds good. Well, thanks again, Casey, and thanks again, everybody listening. God bless you and your families, and we'll see you on the next podcast.
Thanks for listening to this episode of Massive Passive Cash Flow. Be sure to go to realestatewithgarywilson.com to join our community and start building wealth today.